Hey guys, I'm Nathan from Arms and Armor. Today, I want to look at some details of the geometry of this original sword and the reproduction we make, because I think it gives some really interesting insights into how many late medieval swords were made. Stay tuned. All right, so this is an original 16th century, early 16th century arming sword from the Oakeshott Institute collection. The grip on this is not original, everything else is. This number right here is a Victorian Museum mark. Pay no attention to it. So we've recently started reproducing this sword, which we're calling our Venetian captain's sword, because it's a relatively high prestige piece from the area of Italy around Venice, probably Venice itself, based on the kind of aesthetic of the piece with the seashells and everything. I've talked about this sword before, how it's an early example of a complex hilt, but in reproducing it, one of the things I've really noticed is how complex the geometry of this blade is. Right? So if we look at the blade, overall, we can say that it is hexagonal, right? It has flat, parallel surfaces that taper out, and then it has facets on each side that come down to the edge. The facets, each facet in the middle of the sword is about a quarter of the width of the whole blade, right? So this facet's 25%, the flat, big facet's 50%, the other 50%, the other edge facet is 25% of the width of the blade. Of course, the blade is tapering, and those proportions change a little bit over the length of the blade. So that's not that complex, right? That's a fairly basic hex blade, which were very common, especially in swords that were meant for use against unarmored opponents, right? A hex-shaped blade like this cuts great. And this particular sword really moves through the kinds of guards we see in the Bolognese tradition, with arming sword, which is, has a significant unarmored component. Now, when we look up here near on the fort of the blade, near the hilt, right, you can see that we have these ricassos, right? We have a central ricasso and then two ricassos fullers. Two fullers on the ricasso here, and one central fuller. The geometry here is not hexagonal, right? Essentially, it is a diamond cross-section right here with a fuller in the center. What do I mean by this? Well, as we move up the blade, right, each of these facets moves from the edge of the fuller all the way down to the edge until you get up here toward the top of the fuller, where you start to have a flat center of the blade. So here, it's not flat at the center, right? It looks, if it didn't have a fuller, it would be diamond section, and it transitions to hexagonal here, right? The balance point on this blade, right, is right there, about 3.5 inches out from the grip. And that is about halfway between the cross and the point where there's a transition to a hexagonal section. So here, diamond section with fuller for the first fifth of the blade. Next, we have a hexagonal section right out until about the final fifth of the blade, where that becomes lenticular. Right? So this flat facet in the center fades out as you get towards the end, and it becomes a lenticular grind for the last fifth of the blade, way out here in the foible. Now, why would they do this? Well, it's probably because this blade is about 1 millimeter thick out at that section, and there's no way to have these kinds of facets extend. It also wasn't necessary because this edge is essentially, right, it just comes down to a sharp section there. So now I'm going to show you the one I've been making and how I was thinking through this process while I was doing it. All right, so here's one that's in process, right? Still got some heat on there and stuff, but we're going to focus on the blade, right? So as I was grinding these facets up into this section of the blade, looking at the original, I realized I had to change the geometry of my grind, and this transition from the flat section here into the diamond section with a fuller, right, really meant that I just had to do this by hand, right? So all these, when we machine the first part of this blade, all we're doing is machining in the basic taper and the fullers. All of this, like the edge facets and everything, we just hand grind into the blades, right? But up here, right, it's so complex, the transition from this edge facet to it going away and it becoming diamond section right here. Frankly, I just did that with a block of wood and some sandpaper to get that to change correctly. That's not really power tool grindable right there. Similarly, out here at the point, right, you can see where this lenticular section starts to take over down here. Now this one isn't sharpened yet, and it's not all the way finished, so this will change a little bit, but that section goes from a really sharp facet right here and here down towards the end where it starts to fade away and become lenticular, right? Sorry, careful while I hold this so the grip doesn't fall off because there's no grip on there yet. You can see that this sword is very thin and flexible, right? It's a piece that is going to be a phenomenal cutter. This is actually a sword that I'm finishing up to bring out to SoCal Sword Fight here next week. So if you're at SoCal Sword Fight, you'll get to handle this guy, and I'm bringing the original out there too for a presentation. So if you're out there, come say hi to me. But anyways, I just thought this was an interesting, close look at sword geometries. Some swords have a relatively simple geometry, right? You have a pretty consistent taper on a diamond section. Some of them change a lot over the length of the blade, and that, those kinds of precision are, I just can't speak this morning. Those kinds of transitions are really something that you get a good understanding of when you're looking at the original and trying to reproduce it and saying, oh, what did they do right there? How can I do that? It's always an interesting challenge. Thanks for sticking with me through that one. I think I need more coffee this morning. Take care. See you next time.